it sees a seal, and it's like, that's like what they eat, right? So it sees the seal, it like wants to eat it, and then it sees this human in this glass box, and it just goes after it. It's like a survival thing, because like back like thousands of years ago, if there was like rustling and noises, it would wake you up. You would wake up to like survive.
How did people go to sleep back then? Like you're just in the middle of the jungle.
Yeah.
Like there's like wild cats out there, bears. There's like coyotes like howling in the distance, just ready to like tear you up.
Yeah.
You're just like, so tired.
Well, because especially
I'm exhausted.
You think about like, didn't humans originate in like the savannah in Africa? So it's like, imagine you're just like in the plains like that, and there's like lions, and all those like predators, and there's like no cover or anything. Where are you sleeping?
Here's my question: like, if like looking back on that time, we would think like, oh, that would be crazy stressful, adrenaline ridden, like always on alert. But like maybe because we know that the human body adapts, right? If you put humans in some situation initially, it's going to be hard, but then like they adapt to their environment and it becomes less hard. Like, what was the inner experience of those humans like, I wonder? Like, was it always crazy chaotic, or do you just like get used to like that high pressure situation where it's just kind of like like you see death around you all the time, like your uncle gets torn up by a mountain lion, your grandfather gets like swooped by a gorilla.
You have to assume that humans back then were way more adapted to that. Because like if you put a modern day human in that, I feel like there's just no way that they would be like successful. Like if you put an average human from now compared to like an average human from then, like they'd be way more fitted to that environment.
Well, I'm talking about their inner life though.
Like their
inner experience, like the stress of the situation.
Yeah, it seems like they would have just, like, since they're constantly living in that, the stress just wouldn't get to them as much. Because, we constantly live in, I guess that's not really true of us. If we constantly live in a business environment, like business is constantly stressful to people. So.
Yeah, but it's like a similar thing though, where it's like the first time you get put in that like insane, like say stressful business situation, like that's really hard. But then like after that happens to you over and over, like you get more used to it and you'd be more capable of handling it.
That's true.
Dude, I think that I know we talk about evolution a lot, but I feel like once you understand that like a lot of your actions are like evolutionary, I feel like that just opens up so much understanding and like why we do what we do.
Yeah.
Like there's this theory that it's in this book called Why Buddhism is True, and it's basically talking about like there's a lot of evolutionary psychology, and he like links that to like some claims that like Buddhism makes. But he was talking about, typically when we have a thought enter our consciousness, there's always like some sort of feeling kind of under it a little bit, or like underlying, like it's a little hard to notice. Sometimes it can be kind of subtle, but if you kind of settle down, I've tried to do this and like look at the thoughts as they come through, there's always some sort of like emotional thing in there. So his theory was like maybe like feelings arose as a way to like label the thoughts, like their importance for survival, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So like when a thought comes in, if you have like a bunch of thoughts going on at the same time, because they've looked at the brain and they've shown that like, I forget how they showed this, but there's a bunch of like neurons firing at the same time for like cognitive like thought creation. I think I could be getting this wrong, but there's a bunch of like thoughts battling it out to enter your consciousness. And he was basically saying that like maybe like feelings are just a way of like categorizing like the priority of each
that
thought
makes
that
sense. So like in a stressful situation, this thought of danger is like the
that's
first
why
thing.
it's always the first thing that enters, is because it's like super emotional. And then like that's also why if you're angry at your friend or whatever, like it's super like the thoughts that enter your head are super emotional ridden. I don't know.
Yeah, like you can be, that makes sense. You can be thinking about something else, like you're stressed about school or something.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden something else comes up has more emotional weight, more impact on your life, and all of a sudden that's, like your brain categorizes that as something that's more important, and so that's what you're thinking about.
Yeah, so his theory was like once you like look at your thoughts and see the emotions attached to them, then like you try and like separate yourself from those like emotionally like connected thoughts. They can help you like look at stuff more objectively. That was his theory.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think with like emotions can like make certain things seem like a bigger threat than it actually is. And like if you look at it objectively, it will like help you identify like what's like the most important to like my survival or like my success in the future.
Speaking of emotional thoughts, I'm gonna segue. Have you guys seen the video of the monk like burning himself alive?
Yeah.
Oh,
I was looking at it the other day. And it's just like, I mean, we could pull up a video, but we're talking about Buddhism right now, and like labeling emotional thoughts and like viewing them objectively and separating yourself from that. If that's not like the most, like, I can't think of another example of just like how far human potential can go for like separating yourself from your emotional thoughts. Like, can you think about the inner monologue of like just sitting there and like everything's burning around you and like pain, like just literally everywhere, just terror, like absolute, like this is it, and like immense suffering, and you're just like, the guy doesn't move, he doesn't make a sound, he sits in the lotus position the whole time until he just eventually like falls over. Like that to me says that like maybe, like obviously there are some outlandish claims from Buddhism, but they've got to have something right with like their diagnosis of the mind, and like they got to have something that they know about mental strength.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there is some things that Buddhism has right, obviously. And I don't know a whole lot about it, but I think there's something we can learn probably from every religion, even the pagan religions of ancient times. There's probably something that we can learn. And Buddhism maybe is closer to the truth than any of those ones were, but yeah, that's crazy to think
Joseph
about.
Campbell, you guys know who he is?
Yeah.
He always like the guy who talks a lot about like mythology, and like he I think he coined like the hero's journey.
Oh yeah.
He has this quote where he basically says each religion is like a software, and it's plugging into the same source. So like each different like group of people, each demographic, they have different software that they're using, different techniques, different rituals, different details that they're using. But you can think about it as they're each trying to get to the fundamental source of going and appreciating something bigger than yourself.
Like yeah, they all generally have the same goals.
Of developing like empathy, compassion, understanding your mind. It's kind of like the same thing. Which is like I that's why I think like even if you're not Christian, like if you look at like the Bible, the Quran, like Buddhist texts, like like you said, there's something to learn in each one of them. And there's a reason that like those texts have stood the test of time for centuries.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jordan Peterson, for example, finds so much psychological weight in all of the Christian stories.
Yeah.
Like he constantly is referring to the Bible and teaching lessons about human psychology from that, which is really interesting. And
I want to pull up a quote from him. That's crazy. Keep going.
yeah, it's really weird. It's hard to think about like what religion is true. But there's this idea in Christianity, I think I've mentioned this before, of like the divine logos, which is the Jesus, but also logos means like theory or like knowledge, right? And so there's this knowledge infused in people, and so every religion has a bit of that knowledge, but until one comes to know Jesus Christ, one doesn't have the full depth of that knowledge. And actually, even until one enters heaven, he's not going to have the entirety of that knowledge until the beatific vision.
So as humans, I think we need something concrete in order to spread wisdom. That's why we're storytellers. That's why we have Aesop's fables. We have movies, we have TV shows, novels, all this stuff like teaches us stuff indirectly about how to live our life and like how to become a man, like all these like things that everyone goes through. And that's how, before books, that's how we spread wisdom, is by these legends and like all that sort of stuff. And I think like you could argue that the Bible is something different, that it's a holier text, it's got it establishes like the validity of God and all this stuff. I'm not even like gonna dive in there. Like just alone, like the stories that it has have like immense wisdom
And
on
value.
like and on like things that we can turn to like represent ideas. So like case in point, like 12 Rules for Life. Have you read that?
I haven't.
It's a hell of a book. It's by Jordan Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
He says, the story of the golden calf also reminds us that without rules, we quickly become slaves to our passions, and there's nothing freeing about that. So, you know, the story about the golden calf, where it's, you know, it's Moses, he like leaves to go
Moses
get the
goes up to
10 Commandments.
Mount Sinai with gets the 10 Commandments. He's up there for like 40 days.
Yeah.
And the Jews who have just left Egypt are like, where did Moses go? It feels like God has abandoned us.
Yep.
So they gather all the gold. Even Aaron, who's Moses' right-hand guy, Aaron forges this golden calf, and then all of them start worshiping that. And then Moses comes down from the mountain, and he's like, what is going on?
Yeah,
So
and I think, I could be wrong, but there's like examples of like hedonism, like isn't there like, they're going against his word and they're like committing sins of some sort, but like that to me, like, or to anyone, like if you could take that story and like apply it to your own life. Like the main idea behind that, or one of the main ideas behind that, is that we tend to think of like structure and discipline as restricting. Like if only I had more freedom, like I could do what I want. But in actuality, like if you don't have that responsibility, that discipline, that structure in your life, something like placing limits on what you're doing, like it's so easy to fall into hedonism, in this case like the golden calf, or to get misled. It's like we need that structure. That's one of the points that I took from it. And if you were just to say like, oh, the Bible, Christianity, I'm not a Christian, I'm not going to look at the Bible, you miss out on that. And I think a lot of people will miss out on that stuff.
Yeah, one of the stories, or one of the ideas that's really stuck out to me recently that I've thought about a lot, that Jordan Peterson pointed out, is the idea of the abyss. And you can't avoid the abyss, but the longer that you look into it, the longer that you suffer, the longer that you stare into the abyss, it's going to keep getting worse. But there's no way, like, the only way to get out of the abyss, the only way to purge suffering, is to stare into it long enough that you see the other side. And there will always be the other side of the abyss.
So the abyss, are you talking about like your shadow, or
Or just
like
like dark ideas, basically.
No, more like just
the reality of life?
the reality of suffering, basically, is what the abyss is.
Mm-hmm.
So like the Christian story that Jordan Peterson ties to this is the crucifixion and death, and then resurrection of Jesus. So Jesus is this innocent person, right?
Yeah.
And he's tortured. He's first of all betrayed by one of his closest friends. Then he's tortured almost to the point of death. Then he's forced to carry his cross all the way to Golgotha. He's humiliated. He's stripped of all of his clothes. He's crucified, which is one of the most brutal ways to die, the most brutal way in Roman civilization. And not only is he killed despite his innocence, but he's killed because of his innocence.
Yeah.
And then he dies. And so that's like basically the greatest suffering that one can imagine.
Yep.
And then through that, there's the resurrection. Only after the deepest part of the abyss is the resurrection of Jesus, which is, for a Christian, that means the salvation of the world.
Yep. I'm telling you, man, once you start looking at like all the stories as representations of like larger ideas, like one of the things Jordan Peterson said is God, you could view God as a representation of the unknown, like the chaos of life, of reality itself. Like it's everything that we don't know. Like we have order in our societies and all that, and then everything else is like the unknown, and we're kind of subject to that, right? We're like servants to that unknown force. Here's another quote. He says, the ancient Jews blamed themselves when things fell apart. They acted as if God's goodness, the goodness of reality, was axiomatic and took responsibility for their own failure. That's insanely responsible. But the alternative is to judge reality as insufficient, to criticize being itself, and to sink into resentment and the desire for revenge. So like another case is like the Jews, like when something went wrong, instead of criticizing God or like the unknown reality and saying like, oh, like they're out to get me, like what am I supposed to do? Like it's all on them. They took responsibility for their actions, and they looked at themselves as taking responsibility, like how can I adjust myself to accommodate reality?
Yeah,
and reality in this case is God, but it's like that applies to our own life too. Like there's a lot of times when our thinking can fall into, man, I got an F on this test, like
the teacher sucks.
It's out of my hands, the teacher sucks, the material sucks, like I can't do anything about it. Like you criticize the outside thing, where it's like the core message here is look at yourself. You can't control that. That's reality, that's God, that's whatever, that's some representation of something else. You can only control your own self.
Yeah,
I think that's another powerful lesson.
That's something I connect with a lot, because I feel like that's shown up in a lot of civilizations, like how like they'll do like sacrifices. It's like, oh, like there's a drought, we gotta like make a big sacrifice. It's like the reason that's important is like if you just go through life like being a slave to your problems and like not trying to fix things for yourself, like that's like no way to live if you're gonna blame like all your problems on something else. And yeah, a lot of times stuff is gonna happen that you genuinely like probably don't have that much control over, but you still have to like do what you can to put yourself in a situation to succeed.
Yeah.
But you also have to subordinate yourself to, I guess that's not necessarily contrary to what you're saying, but subordinate yourself to the rules.
Yeah, you have to understand there's stuff I can't control, but I still got to do what I can.
That's the fundamental like teaching of Stoicism. Have you guys heard of Stoicism?
I'm not.
Well, it's like a philosophy, just like any other philosophy, but like you see that, like I was saying again, like there are certain patterns in like all sorts of religions. That idea of like letting go of what you can't control, of determining where that line is of what I can control and have responsibility over and what I can't. You see that in like every religion. I think that's on like top 10 like most important lessons, I think, in like all of life.
100%.
I think that's why you see it in every religion, is because it's so important. But can we just talk about like how wild it is that like we still don't know like who the authors are of like the Bible, like how many hands touched it, how it was actually like put together over like centuries. How wild that is.
Well, I mean, it's so ancient that there are some things that just like you're not going to know. And also, okay, so like the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, aka the Torah, the Jewish Torah, those are called like the books of Moses.
Yeah.
And they don't know for sure if Moses wrote those. I think this is kind of the thing, but they know that it was like, first of all, it's about Moses, written at least by a contemporary of Moses, and like constructed, I think, by him partially, like orated, perhaps. And then after that, it's just, what are the other Old Testament books? I don't know.
I mean, in any case, like the point is that this book has spanned an immense amount of time, like unfathomable amount of time. And it's been compressed, it's been manipulated by a bunch of different people. So many people have had their hands on it to like form it into what it is. And like you gotta think that a book that would last that long has to be like distilling some core messages about like the human experience. Like if it was to be edited, like taken out, like let's remove this, let's add this in, it's constantly changed. Like the end product has to be like, there has to be something of value in that.
Well, it hasn't really been edited though through the years. Is that?
Yeah, that's what he's saying.
Like,
that's what he's saying, I think.
What do you mean?
That it hasn't really changed, and that like speaks to like how human experience is still like generally behind the same principles.
Yeah, but also like it has been changed over the years.
In what
as
ways?
people have, well, because I don't know a whole lot about it, but I think as it like went through centuries and whatever, like different people have had their hands on it, and I think have edited it, right? No,
I don't think so.
It hasn't been edited.
No.
I'm talking about like over like centuries.
Well, okay, so like there's during the Protestant Reformation, the Protestants, like Martin Luther said, okay, I think these 6 books are heretical or what was the word? Apocryphal. So I'm going to take these out. So there's like that kind of editing, but like the text itself has not been changed for millennia.
So you're telling me that like once one person wrote something and then it like passed on to the other person, they didn't touch it at all?
Right.
Well, let's look into that.
Yeah, let's see.
Because you have to assume whether or not like people tried to change it, that there has to be some sort of like either translation error or like, because I feel like I've seen something somewhere where they're like the oldest found copy of like certain like gospels or whatever are from like 100 to 200 years after Jesus' lifetime.
There's the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are like, I think, within the first 100, maybe first 200 years. But the reason that the Bible hasn't changed is because it's always been, well, for the first 2,000 years, I guess a lot more than that maybe, but it was always, there was a set rule over the Jews, right? There was a leader, or there were judges, that there was always a central authority, and that wouldn't have allowed the Bible to change throughout the years. And then came Jesus, and the Gospels were written by the apostles mostly. And then we still have really, really early accounts of the Gospels that can be translated into English. And then the letters, the epistles.
How do you pull this up?
Just drag it onto the screen. Drag it up. There you
Oh,
go.
I see. This is NPR. I don't know really what to do with this, but it says that in the original manuscripts from Mark, the story of Jesus visiting the disciples is nowhere to be found. We actually have more than one ending in the manuscripts. We have some with no ending. So what we think probably happened there is that as soon as you see the other Gospels with the resurrection stories, early in the 2nd century at least, someone says, we need to put some of this material into Mark to round it off better. That to me sounds like there's some like manipulation. Like, I'm not talking about like recently, I'm talking about way, way back.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, my point wasn't that like they were tampering with it or not. My point was that the project has spanned like unfathomable amount of time.
Okay.
And it's like, it's been a project that like a crazy amount of people have dedicated their lives into and put in all their energy and wisdom into. So like, there has to be value there. That was my point. Whether or not this is true or not, I don't know. Can be debated. But
Do we have
any
anything
thoughts?
else? Anything else? Do we want to transition into something else, or do you have
One thing I kind of wanted to talk about is, we were talking about Jordan Peterson earlier. Have you heard about his diet?
Oh, does he
His
eat carnivore?
diet? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's crazy to me. So, it just seems so weird that some people like swear by this carnivore diet. Like, Jordan Peterson says it's fixed like everything about his life. I don't know, it's kind of absurd. And other people are like, no, vegan all the way. Vegan has helped my life in so many, being vegan has helped my life in so many ways. It's made me so much healthier. It's just so weird that these two things can both be true from different people. Like, there has to be some, or maybe there isn't, but there has to be, it seems like there has to be some like best diet for the human body.
I disagree.
Yeah.
Here's why. You have people growing up and evolving in different climates for thousands of years. Like you have people on the savannah, you have people on the coast, fishing people, you have people in the mountains. You have all these different people who are evolving over time. I think it would make sense that due to that evolutionary pressure, there would be certain people with like different ethnic descents that would function better on, say, a fish, like a more like coastline diet, or maybe a more meat diet if you're in, I don't know, like the savannah or whatever, and you're hunting like lions and you're not going to be hunting lions, but like you get the point. Like animals, I think because we evolved in different areas, we probably have different diets that function best for us, and I think it's just like a trial and error to see what you function best with.
Well, yeah, and I think one thing like that kind of does like make sense how it can work is like, if you think about it, say you're eating like, say you're comparing like a vegan diet to an only animal-based diet, like you can still get the same type of stuff because the animals that you're eating are either eating the plants themselves, and that's where you're getting like the certain nutrients you need, or they're eating other animals that are eating the plants themselves. So it does make sense that you're able to get like everything you need from like a ton of different diets, because at the end of the day, everything's coming from plants, from one source or another.
Do those nutrients transfer though? Like, do the nutrients that a cow eats transfer into the meat of a cow?
I mean, I feel like to a certain extent, yeah. Like, can't you meet all of your like nutritional needs eating animals? Like, I mean, I don't actually know, but like.
Well, one thing about that is if you're only eating animals, you're actually going to have less nutritional needs, because one thing is like vitamin C, for example.
Yeah.
Vitamin C is there to help you break down carbohydrates. And if you're not consuming any carbohydrates, you're not going to have a need for vitamin C.
Yeah.
So that could be one like explanation for how you're getting all of everything you need through just this type of diet.
Here's the problem with like viewing it in like a nutrition way though, is that like you look back to like, I think it was like the 1800s when they were first starting to like discover nutrients. They started with macronutrients, right? They started with like protein, carbs, fiber, fat, all that stuff, and they thought they had it unlocked. They're like, okay, like it looks like if you give people enough protein, carbs, fiber, whatever, they'll be good. And they started using that, and like people would go on like ship voyages, whatever, like just making sure they have like protein, carbs, and fiber, whatever. And then they get to like scurvy, which is like a deficiency in vitamin C. So then they're like, oh, okay, we just got to make sure that we have vitamins, right? So vitamin C, vitamin A, B12, all that stuff. And then like now I think it's kind of transitioning into, have you guys heard of like micronutrients?
Yeah.
So like there's this compound in like broccoli, it's called like sulfane or something, and like your body needs that. It needs to get that in certain sources or else it doesn't function. But that's not like a vitamin or like a macronutrient.
Yeah.
So at each level, we think that we have a hold on what we need nutritionally, and then we discover like, oh, there's like a whole bunch more here that like we didn't realize.
Yeah.
So I think the safest way to like not get trapped in like that nutrition thing is just like eat like real foods that like are guaranteed to have pretty much like all those compounds that we evolved to eat, you know?
Yeah, I think that's one thing I've talked about with you before, is you were talking about like organic and like genetically modified stuff, and it's like how you don't want to, like, you don't know exactly like every single molecule. Like say you compare like a genetically modified corn to like the normal corn that people have been eating for thousands of years, it's like sure, like it might have the same like macronutrient profile, but there might be like little stuff in it that's like bad for you or like cancer causing and such.
Yeah. Well, here's another case where like humanity messed up, is we optimize right now for efficiency. That's just like a side product of factory farming, is that the plants that you create are not going to be optimized for nutritional value or like how we evolved to eat them. They're optimized for like how high can we grow the corn and how close can we pack it together. We're going to optimize genetically for that. And when you start doing that over time, they've seen that like the nutritional profile of like plants and stuff is like starting to decrease, which is concerning because it's like if there are other compounds in there that we don't know and we're not optimizing for that and we're losing out, like that might have some repercussions as it like bottoms out. But in any case, we don't have any control over that.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, that's not necessarily something that like, I feel like a lot of people would just like, are kind of centered on like, oh, this is cheaper, like I'm always going to eat this, but then it's like, you don't always know the whole story. And it's like, it could be like, that like, non-organic stuff is like not bad for you at all, but then it also, like, you don't really know at the end of the day.
It really is weird how little we know about nutrition because it's such, like, it's vitally important to us that we eat food. Like, that's what we survive on.
Yeah.
But we know so little about it.
Also, I think it's weird that we grow up in a culture where, like, high sugar consumption and junk food consumption is just like normalized.
Yeah.
Like they say, like it's not a disease if everyone's doing it, and like I would say that like sugar addiction like could be viewed as like disease-like.
Yeah.
Because it's like so hard to break, and as so many time and time again, like they've shown like impacts on mood, impacts on cognitive ability, heart, like all sorts of stuff, just terrible for your body. And yet we have, like for a la carte, dude, like you have Uncrustables with like 20 something grams of sugar and then like chocolate milk sugar, like it's just like normalized where it's like, yeah, get the kids cupcakes, get the kids like whatever. And it's just like, if you grow up with that, it's hard to break that. But I think if you do, that's like, at least for me, like you feel so much better, like you're able to think better, just like, everything opens up because that's how it's back to the evolutionary thing. If you start understanding where we started and you start like altering your habits to like accommodate that, then I think good things happen.
Yeah, have you seen like I haven't actually seen the documentary, but it's like, it's called Super Size Me. And basically this guy, he decides, he was eating like, I don't know what his diet was before, but he's like, I'm gonna eat McDonald's breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 30 days. And basically after like, he was doing like medical checkups every like 5 days or something. And after like only 15 days of like doing it, his doctor pretty much told him, he's like, you need to stop doing this or you're gonna die. It's like, stuff like that can mess you up so fast and like, I don't know.
So as a parent, you have a responsibility to not feed that stuff to your kid, right?
Yeah.
Like if, I feel bad for the kids who were raised on that, or like just junky food.
Yeah.
Like malnourishment, like preservatives, all those like carcinogens. Like if you're feeding that during the developmental phase of your life, there has to be some long-term repercussions that then it's like, mom, dad, like what the hell? Like, like if I would have looked back on it, like you should not have been feeding me that. But like you're a little kid, so there's nothing that you can do.
Well, and I think a lot of times like parents will just be like they just want to get their kid to eat, so they just like give them whatever they want, type of thing. And it's like the kid doesn't necessarily know what's best for them, and so then they'll end up eating crappy food over and over.
That's why I something in me, like I get a little sad when I see like little kids going to like McDonald's or like just having like obviously in moderation.
Yeah,
it's
obviously
okay,
anything
right?
in
But
moderation.
Like there are absolutely kids who eat that way too much, and it's in a way they're kind of helpless.
Yeah.
And it's kind of depressing. But let's segue into something that, unless you guys have anything else to say.
No, I got nothing.
Sapiens, Yuval Harari, excellent book. He says, voles are small, stout rodents resembling mice, and most varieties of voles are promiscuous. But there is one species in which boy and girl voles form lasting and monogamous relationships. Geneticists claim to have isolated the genes responsible for vole monogamy. If the addition of a gene can turn a vole, Don Juan, which is, I think, like a character who's like a womanizer, into a loyal and loving husband, are we far off from being able to genetically engineer not only the individual abilities of rodents and humans, but also their social structures? So I want to unpack that. Like, there's a study where they were actually able to do this. They took that gene out from promiscuous vole, placed it in monogamous vole. That monogamous vole became promiscuous, changed their behavior. So a core aspect of humanity is family. Like, you have your mom, you have your dad, you have your siblings. That's core part of what being human means. I'm family, like we're all family oriented. That's us. What if we could just change that genetically? Like, what does that say about a crucial part of our humanity?
Well, humans aren't. It doesn't seem like humans are like that though, because it seems to me like almost all humans have, I guess, a sort of desire to be, I guess, maybe not polygamous, but like have a sex drive, and there's no like, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem like there's some sort of gene that controls whether you're like attracted to multiple people or just one. It seems more like a behavior that you can control.
Yeah, I would say it's more like a value instilled. Yeah. Or it's like part of our culture more than it's like a gene that says. I wouldn't say it's like a gene that says, oh, you only marry one person. I would say that's something that's like cultural. Because isn't there like polygamous cultures? Like, are they genetically different, or is that just their culture that's different?
That's a good point. Also, like, you see all across the animal kingdom monogamous species, where that's genetic, where there's a reason that they're monogamous and not polygamous. But I don't know. It just makes you like think about what other social things we have that we think are our own free will, but might just be determined by whether we have that gene or not. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. Wait, so Caleb, you think that we're naturally polygamous then?
No, I don't think so. Well, I think that we naturally have a sex drive, right?
Well, that's different.
And we choose what to do with that.
So does every animal, though.
Well, okay, but not every animal has the same sort of thinking and cognitive ability and conscious. Like, not every animal has a conscience. And we, in our conscience, believe that it is wrong, at least because society tells us, maybe it's something deeper. We, in our conscience, believe it's wrong to cheat on, like, we think that you should have one sexual partner that you love for your entire life. And it's wrong to cheat on that partner or to back off from that.
Well, how do you know that expressed morality of like, no, we have one partner, that's what we're gonna do as a society? How do you not know that like what's behind that is a monogamous gene?
Well, I guess I don't know that for sure, but I think that humans are much more complex than animals. And although in society, I think for the most part we do kind of underestimate how much like our genes and the environment affect us. But we also can't underestimate how much free will we have and how much we can choose what to do with, like, even if you have a desire to be polygamous, whatever, you can still override that because we're humans and we have that ability to do so. You can override that and choose a monogamous relationship. So maybe humans have different genes, or maybe humans have polygamous genes, or maybe humans have monogamous genes. But as a culture, we've decided that we're going to be monogamous because we feel that that's the best way to honor each other.
Well, I'm sure that every animal, even the monogamous ones, still have sexual drive even while they're connected in that monogamous relationship. I don't think sexual drive necessarily means that you're polygamous, right?
Okay, yeah.
But I don't know. You bring up a fair point about free will, about like whether or not, like, yeah, that's probably good.
Well, I would like to add, would you say like there's like a point where you can't overcome like certain aspects of your genes? Like, is there certain genes in you that are like you know, like it's trying to make you act this way. You want to act a different way, but yet you still can't like override it. Would you agree with that?
Behaviorally, I don't think so. I mean, there are some things that you can't control, like for example, your IQ. Like if you're just a super stupid person, like if you're born with an IQ of below, I don't know, what's the things are really low, like 75 or something.
Not below 70 is
Okay,
like mentally disabled.
Okay, well if you're born with an IQ below 70, there are some things that you just aren't going to be able to do. But behaviorally, I don't think there's anything outside of us that can, like there are things outside of us that greatly affect our behavior, but I think there's always a way to overcome that.
So you think you could override like any behavior, like pretty much?
I think so, and as a society, we expect people to like.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, but I'm just kind of interested in what you're.
Monk on Fire kind of gives example of that, right?
Yeah.
The power of our will to override our bodily.
Yeah, because every
Right.
biological
Desires.
instinct would be telling that monk to get, like, roll over, stop, drop, and roll, right? Like, get out of that situation. But that monk is just so stoic that he's sitting there.
I genuinely have like
Taking
no
it.
words about that. Like, just to like, that's insane that actually happened. You know? Like, can you imagine like being there?
No, that's crazy.
Anyone else have anything?
I don't know that I have.
Are we close to an hour? No, we still got time to go. All right. Let's talk about this guy, Tony Scurvy. All right, he's a Stanford neuroscientist who is doing some research right now. And what he's doing right now is he's taking the proteins in spinal fluids from younger organisms and he's inserting it into older organisms of the same species.
To try to reverse
And
aging.
he's showing that reverses the aging process.
Oh my gosh.
So, like, have you guys heard about, like, the adrenochrome theory, conspiracy theory?
No.
Basically, like, these elites, like Hillary Clinton and, like, all these other, like, ultra-billionaires are taking... it's silly, but it's like, they're taking the blood of, like, younger kids and putting it into themselves to make them younger. And it's like, everyone's like, what? That's BS. But it's like, this guy is basically showing that, like,
It could work. Not
hypothetically, it could work, maybe. I haven't really looked into it. I just saw the headline. But, alright, you guys talk while I type, because I can't
Alright.
at the same time.
Yeah, one thing that's also really interesting about like human biology and brains is last time we were talking about the split brain experiment.
Yeah.
How you can split your, like, you have two hemispheres of the brain and they control two different things. And I did a little bit more research on that. And there's this one guy who they were able to experiment on because he was having epilepsy, like really, really bad. And the way that they fixed that is basically cutting the nerve that connects the two sides of the brain.
Yeah.
So he was able to still function pretty much normally, except when they did experiments with him, they showed like two different images on a screen, one on the right side, one on the left side. And so your left eye goes to your right brain and it controls the stuff on your left.
Okay, yeah.
And your right eye goes to your left brain, and your left brain controls whatever's on your right side. So they showed him two different images at the same time. One was like a hammer and one was like a handsaw or something like that. And so on his right side was the hammer and on his left side was the handsaw. And the researcher asked, what did you see? And he said a hammer, because that was on his right side. And they're like, did you see anything else? He's like, no, I don't know. And then they said, okay, close your eyes and draw what you saw.
And he drew up.
And he drew a handsaw.
Oh my
That's what I was talking about, dude. That's what I was trying to articulate last time, but it wasn't as eloquent as I would have liked.
God. Yeah.
But you get, like, the idea that I was trying to say?
Yeah.
How you can split consciousness like that.
Uh-huh.
Like, inhabit one of them while still having the other one, like, in your body, but, like,
Independent of each other.
independent of you, like...
Yeah, and it was article that I was reading was also saying that you might be able to memorize 2 different things at once.
Mm-hmm. And
Like-
did you see the thing where they like had the instruction on one side? They somehow communicated it to the one that's dormant in your body to stand up.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would stand up and go get something and then come back and then they ask the other side why they did that and make something up that just wasn't true.
I didn't see that, but no, that's crazy.
But in any case, take a look at this. This is on Stanford Neuroscience. Old mice that received young blood experienced a burst of brain cell growth in the hippocampus. They had 3 to 4 times as many newborn neurons as their counterparts. But that was not all. Old blood had the opposite effect on the brains of young mice, stalling the birth of new neurons and leaving them looking old before their time.
Huh. So is like the brain and like neuron growth one of like the main things of aging, like one of like the main downsides of aging.
Yeah, so I think the main, I could be wrong, but David Sinclair, he's like a guy from Harvard that's studying it. I kind of listened to some of his stuff, and he's basically saying the main function of aging, there's like some underlying thing that you see in like Alzheimer's, you see in dementia, all sorts of like age-related decline. You see the cells like attacking each other.
Oh yeah.
Or it's like some sort of cell malfunction at the base level. And I think that might be seen in the neurons too. That might be what they're talking about. Like the aging on these young mice might be like the neurons are just like not functioning at the base level. But I mean, it brings up all kind of questions. Like, if this is true, and this is true for humans, what do we do about that? If I could take blood from Caleb's younger sister and put it in my body and make me younger, but I don't know if Caleb's okay with that. You know, like what are the ethics behind that?
Well, the other thing is we already have blood transfusions all the time to save people's lives.
To save people's lives, though.
But, well, okay, but is that affecting their, like, if they get blood from a younger person, is that making them
Yeah, I
younger?
think
that's true.
I think one of the important things is like, does it have a negative impact on the young person in any way?
If receiving blood from an older person or giving blood?
If the young person gives blood, is there a negative effect on them? Like if they give blood to say make Roman younger,
I don't think so.
Is that just a net positive for Roman and a net even for them?
Because I think when you give blood, like you're not really affected, right? Because you could afford to lose a certain amount of blood. But even if that was true, how would we create the infrastructure to make that happen? Like, would it be through some sort of company where like you pay to buy the blood of younger children? If so, like, is the age of consent a concern?
Yeah.
Well, but what are the ethics even of trying to extend your life? Is that ethical, or is it ethical to try to live forever? Is that something that you would want?
You say? Well, I don't know that it could. I still don't think it could make you live forever, but I think it could extend your life, right?
Yeah, I think
There's
already.
a certain point when your body will just break down, like because that's not like that heals your whole body.
Unless we find a way to isolate consciousness and insert it into a cyborg.
That's so interesting.
Well, okay, but the reason your body breaks down, right, is because your cells start attacking each other and you start basically decaying before you die.
Dude, Black Mirror.
But if you can,
Sorry, go ahead.
if you can reverse that with this, like, it seems almost unlimited to how long you can live. And also, some of my I have these friends who, Rich, his sister and her husband, or maybe it's her brother. Anyway, some relation. They're working at a lab at the University of Minnesota, and they're like basically on the cutting edge, and they're almost to the point where they can reverse aging. Like they've figured out so many different things where they can slow down aging. They've got it to work in rats, and so they're at the point where they're basically going to be able to stop aging. And there's the question, is that ethical?
I think it is ethical. Do I think dedicating resources that could be used in other places is, like, that's where it gets tricky, because if you could dedicate resources into, like, cancer or disaster relief, and instead you choose to optimize it, relocate it into extending life, ultimately, like, what if this is super expensive and the only people that are able to pay for this is billionaires? Then it's like we spent all those resources, like, extending the life of billionaires by a
Yeah.
couple of years when we could have saved like
Thousands of lives.
millions of
I
like
think
young
that's
children.
Yeah, that's like the main issue. Like whether or not it would be ethical is who has access to it. Because it's like say like, oh, like all the billionaire people are willing to pay the cancer researchers more to work on extending their life. Like, is that's like almost that's unethical of them because that's like almost like killing the cancer people by taking away their resources.
Mm.
Well, okay, maybe, but that's really indirect.
Yeah, but like I would still say that's unethical to like take away resources from like someone that needs it just because like you have more money.
But here's the thing: in a capitalist society, how do you prevent that? Because you have
Yeah,
to
that's the
provide
thing.
freedom
At
of
the end of the day.
choice to those billionaires.
Yeah. I
That's
think
where
that's
it
where it
gets
gets
sticky.
dicey.
And it's also like the amount of influence that $1 million can have
Yeah.
is like you're no longer talking about like your standard consumer. You're talking about someone who could fundamentally change the course of research by their money.
Yeah.
And it's like that's so much responsibility, and I just wonder how you handle those decisions as a billionaire. But
Well, the other thing is they're able to a lot of like, field development at really young ages. They're able to spot, you know, deficiencies, like for example Down syndrome or something like that, and they're researching ways to basically cure that, I guess, by fixing these chromosomal disorders. But even that, like, would that really make a better world to take away all, not necessarily all suffering, but all like variation almost in the human
Make everyone
person?
the same.
Yeah, like how much joy is experienced not only by people with Down syndrome, but also because of people with Down syndrome.
yeah,
Right.
I've heard people with disabilities claiming that like their disability is fundamental to their identity.
Yeah.
That's who they are.
And you
And
take
if you
that
took that away, they would be a different person. So it's like if you take away someone's, I don't know, like you said, variation, are you stealing part of their identity away from them, or are you working to alleviate their suffering? Like it's
that's
a gray area.
that's interesting.
And you can't just ask the person for consent beforehand, right? You have to make the choice before they're
You're
out of the
controlling
womb.
their life.
It's dicey. I don't know. But I think already, with our level of knowledge of nutrition and medical practices and, like well-being, knowledge of like carcinogens, smoking, we know smoking's bad, all that stuff, already I think our lifespan will probably be like relatively longer than past generations. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe like average lifespan right now is 70, like maybe pushing it to 80, 90.
Well, what is the average lifespan in the U.S.? Because I thought it was like 77.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's
I
like
think so.
72 for males.
But I know that it's getting
It's-
longer.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's like that's almost like the lifespan from 70 years ago. Because it's like the people that are dying now at 75, 80 were born in the 40s.
Yeah.
So it's like, how did that like then early nurturing stage like?
Dude,
pushes
and
that
then they
back?
would like mothers would be like smoking when they had babies.
Yeah.
And then like there was a period of time when they believed that breast milk was worse than actual, or
Than, like,
oh,
cow's milk?
sorry, breast milk was worse than like the packaged like Nesquik baby milk. That's legit where I forget how this went down, but there was some like slimy thing where Nesquik like got their hands in on a research that about like child development, and they were able to like change the cultural norm to packaged milk instead of breast milk. Like that's gotta have some consequences on the lifespan, don't you think?
Yeah.
So like stuff like that, it's a limit. Obviously we're not perfect. There are gonna be things that we look back on.
Well, like obesity and stuff, right? Now.
Yeah,
So
it's
you
things
have
that we're doing that seem barbaric in the future, but we're absolutely better than we were before.
Yeah, I would agree.
Like, I think we'll see a lot more people pushing like maybe 130, 140 maybe.
Who knows?
Who knows? I mean, it's hard for us
Like
to
say
say.
if
but-
someone's born now and they live to be 130, like They're not dying until 50. That's insane.
And then you go Black Mirror, where you extract your consciousness from your body and you put them in some
A robot?
AI
Is that
heaven
the same
where they can live
person?
forever.
Is that the same person? If you
It's your consciousness. I identify with my consciousness. I don't know about you. Dude, here's the thing I want to talk about. How much time do we have?
I think we're basically done.
Alright, ending question. Is living for eternity terrifying to you?
Oh my gosh.
I think it's the worst thing. I think it's worse because we can't even fathom how long it is. Just try and think about that. You can't comprehend because we have to have an end to everything that we think about.
Wait, hold on. Do you mean living for
Under-
eternity in terms of like supplanting your consciousness, or in terms of like the afterlife?
Experience either way.
Well, in terms of the afterlife, that would be a totally separate thing because that's outside of time, right?
How would it be outside of time?
Well, okay, so in the Christian view, I don't know how other religions view the afterlife, but heaven and hell both are completely outside of time because time is part of the created universe. Because time, what is time? Time is movement. Time is the motion of things. And in heaven, there is no change, there is no motion, and therefore there is no time. It's completely outside of time. So the experience of time.
How can you exist outside of time?
Well, that's so
You can't even
incomprehensible.
conceptualize.
Right. Which is why it's not necessarily something that I'm fearful of. Like, the fear of hell is something that I think about, and that's scary. But the idea of living forever and like being bored or something, that's not something that bothers me because, for one, heaven is like the entire encapsulation of goodness, and two, time is not a thing outside of the created universe.
Well, all right.
That's
well,
very
let's
interesting.
save that for next time, man.